on the Essex website for this conference, which was for QAA, and they were calling then for a more relational view of how students and staff and institutions might work together. I'm not so sure that the NUS might be calling for that now, to be honest, in the light of the funding crisis we are facing. But however, you know, this idea of moving away from a student as consumer, really. And Mike Neary, who's now at the University of Lincoln, has initiated a whole area of work which he calls student as producer, where, again, it's this idea of collaborative development and production of knowledge. And Ron Barnett, who's from the Institute of Education, has a very interesting book called A Will to Learn, Being a Student in an Age of Uncertainty. And what he's talking about there is that, you know, what being a student means, it's about engagement in authentic tasks, in authenticity, and in critical inquiry. So I think, you know, there is quite a big movement here that we can see is relevant to what we're discussing. But the other thing that has been informing our work quite a lot is this idea of relational agency, which comes from activity theory. And I'm not going to get into all of that today, don't worry. However, it is, I think, a really useful concept to think about, because the trouble with the word agency, which I've heard many, many times already in the debate and in other discussions today, is that it can be a very individual sort of notion, the idea that you are making the student into a very individual person, whereas if we're working towards a community of scholars idea, a community of inquiry, then what we need is how people work together. And so Edwards talks about how we are able to align our thoughts and actions with the thoughts and actions of others. So it's not necessarily about being an individual agent, but about being an agent in a community, I would argue. Okay. Just very briefly, a little bit about Bristol. In medical education, the undergraduate medical programme at Bristol, they have a distributed teaching model. Students are in the university for the first 2 years, and then they are out in placements in clinical settings across the whole of the southwest. And that's obviously, in many ways, a very rich and diverse set of learning experiences, and you rotate around, don't you, Olivia? So you're not just in one place, but you're moving to different hospitals. However, there is actually sometimes issues about how much teaching you get, or the kind of teaching you get. So you might see someone having a knee operation, or you might not. So there are sort of concerns about how you make sure that the students have equality in terms of their learning. And this is one of the crucial roles that e-learning has played in medical education at Bristol, in actually helping to provide a consistent learning experience. And the work that we're going to talk about today, both the research and the e-learning initiative, is all sort of underpinned by that idea of how e-learning can supplement what the rich but yet very diverse experiences that students have out in clinical settings, how that can be made to kind of complement that, I guess, is probably the word, really. And there's all sorts of things that Jane could talk about for about 2 hours about what they do, but we're going to look at 2 particular things. So it was as a backdrop to that Jane and I 3 years ago got our heads together and decided that we wanted to try and institute a longitudinal study of e-learning in undergraduate medicine, because they're doing all sorts of things. And Jane was discussing with me and saying, but we don't really know how any of this works. We don't really know what the students think of it, how much they're engaging with it, how they're engaging with it, in what ways. So we set up this participative action research programme, which in the first year was really action research mainly between ourselves and clinical teachers and clinical teaching fellows who were e-learning developers essentially. But last year and this year as well, we're in our third year now, we've been involving students much more in that as co-researchers. And specifically, the students have been involved in recording for 6 months their experiences of using ICT both in formal settings and also informally as part of their study practices, using video diaries, and they're actually using the flip cameras that those of you who were in the session with the students from the business school here at Exeter earlier will have heard about. So small little cameras, and they've done regular video diaries, but they've also been involved in the analysis of that data, in writing up the findings, and now we're going through a whole series of conferences. Olivia is joining us here, although this is not related to that, this is to the next thing we're going to talk about. But we've got another conference coming up in Edinburgh in July, and also I think it may also be in June. So there is a series of conferences, and the students have worked with us to put the abstracts together, and then will obviously present with us at those conferences. So we're moving, again, I would argue, towards this community of inquiry approach. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Jane, who's going to talk about the e-learning initiative.
I'm going to just outline briefly a little bit about the Student E-Learning Initiative before Olivia talks specifically about her own project within that programme. The Student E-Learning Initiative falls mainly within what we call our Student Selected Components programme. For those of you not familiar with medicine, every medical school will run a Student Selected Components programme. They may not necessarily call it that, because in addition to those who decide that higher education can confer higher education degrees on students, we also have the General Medical Council who decides whether our students are fit to practice when they enter medicine. And one of the things that the GMC says is you must provide opportunities for independent project work throughout your 5-year programme. Typically at Bristol that makes up between 20 and 25% of our curriculum, and students can choose a number of options that they do throughout their 5 years. Some of those are mandatory. They have to do a literature review, they have to do a clinical audit, they may well do projects around designing patient leaflets on particular disorders. But one of the things that they do at the end of year 3 is they have a 4-week period of independent project work, and one of the options we offer our students is to come and work with us to develop some kind of e-learning material. That could be, typically it tends to be an online learning tutorial, but we are starting to see students doing podcasts and wikis, and some do the most amazing websites with assessment on them and all sorts of things. Typically, well, this does happen at the end of year 3, and that's quite crucial in the topic that the student chooses to do their project on, because the first, as Sue mentioned, the first 2 years they're predominantly doing a lot of biomedical sciences, a lot of human basis of medicine. They're on the university campus. In year 3, they are out all the time in the NHS environment. So it's a new learning environment for a start. It's actually the professional environment in which they're going to end up working, which is very different from the university environment. There's no nice closeting anymore, is there? They're out in the real world of work. It's clinically very intensive. They're starting to understand what it means to become a doctor, not necessarily a student. They're starting to think about professional behaviour. There's a whole load of things going on. Their objective at the end of year 3 is to be able to examine, is to take a consultation and examine a patient and think about coming up with some kind of diagnosis. So it's quite an intense year, and that really does influence what they choose their topic on. Some things they do is how to survive your endemo attachment, but it's very real world experiences, very different from the way a teacher might approach developing their e-learning materials. How did you do this?
Arrow down.
Okay. We're now preparing for our 8th year of this initiative. It enjoys a very high profile with our students. We continuously evolve it. we're now this year starting to expand it into year 4 as well. There's a new SSE option being placed into year 4. It's only 3 weeks. And we're going to be focused on developing materials for general practice. There is a student prize, which Olivia was a joint winner of this year, £300, that has actually been endowed to us by parents of an ex-student. Students are very motivated, and one of the primary motivators for students to do this option is that actually the materials that they develop are then integrated into our curriculum and used by their peers. Other motivations are that it counts as a publication and they can put it on their CV. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to return to this a little bit later, but I'll just let Olivia talk about her own particular experiences of this initiative.
Okay, hi, I'm Olivia. I'm going to talk to you today about the e-tutorial that I developed with my colleague Camilla, who sadly can't be here today. And as Sue and Jane have said, with e-learning, we have the opportunity, we have this 4-week attachment where we can develop any online material. And we chose to produce an online e-tutorial for the examination of the neck and thyroid. Now, as we said, we have our clinical teaching out in academies, and we do experience variability in teaching, both in the amount we have and the quality and interactions we have with staff. And it's a concern for students that we're not receiving the same course teaching. So this was the drive behind it for us. From personal experience and from that of our peers, we have quite minimal exposure to ear, nose and throat teaching. We have 4-day attachments through, and that's for the whole of our medical training. And we did some qualitative research with our peers and found that this is an area they feel quite unconfident in. So that's the rationale behind choosing to do a neck and thyroid exam tutorial. And we thought an e-tutorial is a really good way of addressing this variability in teaching and strengthening the delivery of the ENT curriculum. And that's because it provides this core resource that all students have access to, and they can be reassured that they're receiving the same teaching. So the design, we used the EXE tutorial design platform, and within that we wanted to incorporate a lot of different technologies and present learning materials in different modalities. So this included examination videos of the neck and thyroid. We also had interactive pictorial labelling exercises, also interactive text-based testing knowledge exercises. We also had, importantly, a self-assessment section with feedback all the way built in all the way through. And I just want to show you some of the bits of our tutorial so you can get a feel for it. What I'm going to show you now is some clips of the examination videos that we produced. And we designed them and produced them using Final Cut. And this enabled us to integrate text into the videos to clarify and emphasise points. And also use different zoom effects so you can really clearly demonstrate the examination techniques. Yeah.
Facial signs are only seen in hypothyroidism. These may be facial myxedema,
so here you can see the different zoom.
And tell me if you see any double vision at any point. Start.
This is just an example of how we use text.
In hypothyroidism, you'd be looking for features of a high BMI, any cold intolerance, the patient may seem slow and sluggish, the hair and skin may be coarse, and there may be an obvious goiter.
We also encourage the students to print off an examination checklist and follow this through as they watched, and then get into groups afterwards and practice these clinical skills collaboratively. The interactive exercises we produced, I've got an example for you here now. This is of the triangles of the neck. So here you can see the student just labelling the diagram, and I've purposefully got one wrong here just to demonstrate the feedback that you can get. So once you finish, you click to get your answers. You can see there's 2 right and 1 incorrect answer. And if you hover the mouse over the incorrect answer, it then tells you where that should have been. And these exercises we think are really good because they encourage active learning. You have to engage with the tutorial content and apply the knowledge you've gained to be able to complete the exercises. And it also kind of encourages motivation and learner satisfaction that they can engage in this. The self-assessment was a really big thing from our preliminary research, that students really value opportunity for feedback and explanations. So we incorporated this in. And this just whizzes through some of the examples. There are true and false questions, interpretation of results where to apply knowledge, multi-select answers, and also real-life case studies where they have to use their knowledge to work out diagnoses. And we, as well as providing feedback, gave explanations alongside the answers, just in case people are correctly guessing or not sure in their reasoning. So some of the challenges we faced. Although as students we're well placed to know our own user needs and be able to produce a user-friendly and relevant tutorial, we have insight into what works for us on the e-learning resources that are available to us. We had to work closely with the medical professionals as well to ensure the accuracy of the content. And another thing that we came up against really was an awareness of ethical and legal considerations regarding consent and copyrights. So we overcame these by filming all the videos ourselves, drawing all the illustrations that you've seen ourselves, and also making sure we had consent from patients to use their photographs and use the videos. So to evaluate user testing, we did some online testing where we asked all the clinical students to complete the tutorial and complete an online feedback. And we asked them to give comments about the content design and usability of the tutorial. And we also utilised the flip cameras, and we tried to get some focused feedback from students about their satisfaction. So we've just got some clips here to share with you.
I think the best thing about it was the different ways they presented information, the examination videos, the interactive nature of the tutorial.
What I found really good was the interactive exercises. That's something that I've always really engaged with.
I really like the emphasis they put on the anatomy, so I think that's particularly important with head and neck.
I also really like that they revisited the anatomy of the head and neck and made sure that that was ingrained in your mind before they moved on.
And we used this feedback to change the tutorial to make sure it met user needs, and also to get a gauge of how useful this would be as a resource. So for us, really, it's been an invaluable learning experience. We've learned a lot of skills, some of which I've just mentioned on there: technological skills, problem solving, teamwork, and importantly, how to construct information in a way that it can be used to teach others. And I think importantly, as doctors, we have a responsibility throughout our careers to teach. And this just starts to develop our skills as teachers at an early stage in our careers. So I think if I hand back to Jane, I've got a link at the end of the presentation if you want to explore the tutorial in more depth yourself.
Camilla mentioned there some of her own personal learning experiences and skills that she developed. One of the things the students do, they submit in all of our SSCs. In this case, they submit their e-learning product. But what all students have to do is write a reflective account as well, which talks about their own learning experiences, what they might do differently next time, what they've learned, etc. And one of the things we did as a separate research project is we analysed around 25 of those accounts one year and discovered a huge array of skills coming out, including literature searching, developing personal inquiry skills, IT, project management, collaboration, educational theory, lots and lots and lots of skills being developed. But also the other thing that was coming out was a lot of new insights, them either working themselves or with others to produce new combinations of new knowledge, using new combinations of different tools and ways that we hadn't thought of, and actually developing new e-learning models. And Sue talked about the work of Edwards about relational agency. And we actually think we have some relational agency going on here where students are producing new forms of knowledge. Us as e-learning developers are having to adapt our models of e-learning development. And they also get great opportunities to publish, as Sue and Olivia mentioned, and obviously they're here today presenting. Sue also talked about the work of Angela Brew. One of the things that she talks about a lot is about developing partnerships between staff and students that are fully collaborative on both sides. And we actually feel that we have a real great staff-student partnership here. When teachers develop e-learning resources, I mean, you may get involved with some of that, they tend to approach it from developing resources on core topics. They'll come along and say, well, I want to produce 10 tutorials on this topic, and they produce the first one, it's great, and the second one's great, and by the third one, students are, however great they are, they're just a little bit tired. However, they bring experience, knowledge that is rich, that's very current. They do query whether students have the depth of knowledge to develop e-learning materials. However, what we've discovered is that the students spend a huge amount of time getting the content right, as Camilla said. They go to great lengths to ensure accuracy of content, they go through a much greater reflective cycle of iterative development, testing out assumptions with their peers. They are also hugely inspirational, hugely creative. I think they produce better products than our teachers. They also fill gaps in our curriculum. They strengthen our curriculum. So whereas the teacher comes along and does sort of this across the topics, the students then come along and kind of pepper our curriculum with lots of little things. And so our curriculum is kind of enriched and grows year on year. The other great thing about e-learning development is this is our sustainability. You know, we're not having to go back and make sure the materials are always up to date because the students just keep producing new ones. And for us as an e-learning team, yes, we bring a lot of e-learning knowledge of wealth and knowledge of design, but actually we gain huge insights into what our students do, and we actually take forward some of their practices into our own practice. And this is a quote I particularly like. This is a quote from Will Duffin, who was one of our students, I think in 2005, 2006. He's now an F2. In fact, he's now, I think he's going around Australia, getting involved with general practice in Australia. But this was a great quote from him recently when we did a publication. I felt a strong sense of partnership with my supervisor, who has a consultant radiologist. Actually, I'm not going to read all this because I've only got time. But the key thing for me was, oh, hang on, I've got a bit lost now. But basically what this is saying, I'll leave you to read it yourself, what it's saying is that there was an equal partnership going on. He bought his thing, but the export bought their thing. And actually, also, he wasn't just a passive learner, he was an active contributor. And I think that's one of the themes of the conference today, is about being an active contributor.
Okay, so very, very quickly then, for conclusions, I'm not going to labour this at all because we lost quite a lot of time at the beginning, as you will remember. But, you know, what medical students are doing is learning to become a doctor, obvious thing, I know. But that means having an apprenticeship in authentic problems and also engaging in research, in understanding theory and practice. So it's all of those things. And so you know, what we think this is actually offering is some opportunities for all of those elements to come together. But the other thing is that they're also having an apprenticeship in education through this e-learning initiative where students are developing materials. And a lot of the medical students will end up having to teach when the next lot of medical students come in and land on their ward, and they're going to have to actually engage in teaching. So there's an added element here as this idea of student as teacher, because you know there is a strong motivation towards that for medical students in the future. And I think we've kind of said all this already, really, but the idea that many people are bringing expertise together and that it's not all being held in one place. And so there's, again, that sort of community of inquiry, knowledge-building community is what I think, you know, hopefully you've seen from particularly what Jane and Olivia have said, is building up. And we think this is potentially a very useful model for the future. So, thank you very much. I think we'll leave it there. Possibly... Oh,
yeah.
the link, yes.
Down.
We have one more quote.
Just at the bottom there.
There's the link if you want to go and explore Olivia and Camilla's tutorial in more depth.
Watch us on video.
Is there a link to the actual presentation you've just shown us?
We haven't. I don't know what's happening about that, whether they're going to be linked.